Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68. The offseason is officially here, and as per usual with this Illinois program here recently, there has been plenty of news very early in the offseason, plenty of roster turnover, and a lot to discuss already. And we will make this kind of our off-season preview episode. And there's a lot more clarity that's already been given with a couple guys that have transferred out, and want to make kind of the biggest needs list for Illinois this offseason. That list has grown in the last week already. So plenty to discuss here, kind of a full off-season preview, look ahead for Illinois and what should be yet another very busy off-season for Brad Underwood and Company. I am Kyle Tausk, joined as always by Mike Farmer. Mike, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Some really fun NCAA tournament games recently. A lot of portal news, a lot of transfers and commitments and all that stuff. So still a busy time of year. It's still really fun to be a college basketball fan.
Yeah, on a side note, the tournament has been pretty good. It's ramped up here. There hasn't been a ton of huge drama, but the chalkiness of the tournament so far has made for some pretty incredible matchups. That Texas Tech Florida game was pretty fantastic. Texas Tech Arkansas was great. Houston Purdue was really good. It's been heating up here in the tournament. Should be some great games here today, which will be over by the time this is out. We're recording Sunday morning, but could be a pretty electric Final Four.
Yeah, no question. Could be all one seed still. I think the Auburn-Michigan State game is going to be really good, and then Houston-Tennessee is shaping up to be really fun as well. And then, yeah, that Final Four should be extremely fun too. But I'm starting to think Duke's running away with it. I just do not see a team that beats Duke at this point, with everybody being 6'6", the three-point shooters, the defense. Illinois saw it firsthand a couple weeks ago. It's just very hard to stop.
Duke is pretty incredible. Yeah, they're giving off some UConn vibes. Of course, they'll have some tougher opponents than UConn ever had, but they're insane. That was the easiest pick in my whole bracket was Duke to win the title, because I just was and I realized that everybody was going to take Duke, which I hate. I like to try and get an advantage by picking someone else, which I think you did. You picked Houston, which I think is possible. If there's one team that could give Duke a challenge, I think it's Houston, but Duke does look pretty unbeatable right now. But let's talk about Illinois, because that's why people listen. The Fighting Illini are going to have quite the offseason ahead of them again, and for a few unexpected reasons, although many reasons expected, obviously. Illinois was going to be active in the portal regardless, and there's going to be plenty of needs to fill, and that's just the world we're living in now. But dealt a couple pretty significant blows already in the portal, and we'll start there. Kerry Booth enters the portal on Thursday. No disrespect to Kerry, but we won't really discuss that one. I think that one was expected for quite some time, just didn't end up working out at Illinois. I'd expect him to probably transfer down to a lower level and try to get a bigger role there. So that one doesn't make much of a difference for next year's roster, just kind of a miss from Illinois in last year's portal cycle, and a guy that you pretty much expected would probably move on after a year. But the biggest news of the offseason so far, and really the most shocking news of the offseason so far, Friday, Morez Johnson enters the portal. And that one, I'm sure you would agree with this, is both the most surprising but also the most painful portal entry of the transfer portal era for Illinois. I think the only one that could really compare is probably Adam Miller when he hit the portal. And in hindsight, that one hasn't been as painful with the way that his career has turned out. But this one definitely hurts for Illini fans. Very surprising as well. Morez was a guy that I think most people penciled into next year's roster as a core piece, and it didn't seem like until some of the things that have kind of been rumored here recently that he was a guy that would have any interest in looking in the portal. A guy that's been committed to Illinois since before his sophomore year of high school, in-state kid, guy that had a really good freshman season, played a lot down the stretch of the year. Obviously had the injury, but was a huge part of Illinois' rotation, fan favorite guy that just did the motor, the dog that he had to his game is something that endeared itself to Illini fans. And the hope for Morez was that he was going to be next year, a huge piece returning and build maybe one of the best front courts in college basketball, potentially with him and Tomislav Ivicic. But then I think the hope was you look a year into the future and Morez Johnson's the face of your program for a couple seasons as an upperclassman, and now he is going to move on and transfer. So I'll throw it over to you on that news, your initial thoughts to hearing that.
Just brutal in a couple ways. First off, like as a fan of the team itself, like just a dominant player, and I think in a couple years down the road, All American potential, no question, possibly NBA draft potential. So losing a guy like that is pretty terrible. But then just as a fan, as you were saying, the dude committed here as a 15-year-old from St. Rita in Chicago. Like you don't see that type of commitment and actually sticking with that commitment and staying committed for 3 years and then actually enrolling at Illinois, playing a year and being a fan favorite, like you said, having that dog, the motor, just one of the best offensive rebounding freshmen and still pretty raw in some ways as a freshman on the court, but just you could see the talent oozing from him from like the moment he stepped on the court. He was just that talented and yeah, fan favorite, just a really fun player to watch. So yeah, like you think back to that Adam Miller transfer back, I think it was April 1st of like 2021, right after Illinois lost to Loyola. That one really stung and it was super, super shocking in a lot of ways too. But like even then, there were questions about like Adam Miller actually being super committed to Illinois and like going back to him in high school. We weren't sure if he was actually going to come here. There were rumors of him going elsewhere, stuff like that. But with Morez, he seemed so committed from the moment he actually did commit, showing up to games in Champaign all the time, taking pictures with fans, all that stuff. He was just seemed like an everyday guy and a Illini for life. And now that's not going to be the case, which it's the transfer portal era. Like you got to go find your money. You got to go find opportunities elsewhere if you feel like you're not going to thrive in your previous role for whatever reason. But so I don't totally blame him, but it definitely just sucks as a fan. That's a big hole on Illinois' roster for the next coming years.
Yeah, it's just really surprising because he's not a guy, and really you probably shouldn't ever feel like there's guys nowadays based on all the money that's getting thrown around and just the way things are in college basketball. You probably shouldn't feel like any guy is locked in or a guy that, you should probably expect every guy to transfer at this point. But Morez just seemed like of any guy that Illinois had, probably the guy you would have least thought would enter the transfer portal be Morez, just because, yeah, the in-state ties, the fact that he's been committed for so long, the fact that he had a lot of opportunity on this year's Illinois team. And yeah, he had to share a front court with Tommy, and there were some games where he didn't play a ton. But yeah, like you said, he wasn't a finished product by any means. He's a freshman that was pretty raw offensively. Now, you love the intangible stuff he brought. His rebounding was phenomenal. He showed flashes defensively, even if he was inconsistent on that side. And his minutes were overall very positive for Illinois, but he got a lot of opportunity. He started 8 games until he got injured and played a huge role for Illinois as a freshman. And so it kind of blindsided you when you saw Morez hit the portal, because it's just a guy you would never have expected that to happen. Now, you probably should expect it more, because I think just the fact that there's so much money being thrown around in college basketball. I think really it seems like there's multiple reasons that this happened. And again, a lot of this stuff is just rumors that fly around. Social media is active this time of year. You hear a bunch of things floated around. So not trying a lot of stuff that maybe we say on these pods. Yeah, I can just put a disclaimer out there. I can't confirm any of it, but you hear a bunch of stuff. Number one, I think the obvious thing, and you don't really need to confirm this to know, money's being thrown around. Morez Johnson probably is hearing a lot of high dollar figures thrown his way, and the big man market in college basketball and the transfer portal is incredible right now. Like, teams are throwing huge money to big men because it's just so hard to find guys that are really impactful at the center position. And I think Illinois, I'm sure, wanted to prioritize Morez and really wanted to bring him back, but there probably becomes a point where when you do already have Tomislav Ivicic, who you want to bring back, and obviously he's going to command big dollars, if there's desperate teams that are looking at Illinois and saying, okay, they already have a big, let's see this Morez Johnson. Maybe you want to overpay for a guy like him or throw a big dollar figure at him. I'm sure that is enticing to a guy like Morez. But then you're also hearing things such as, maybe he wasn't super happy with how he was used offensively as more of just kind of a rim runner and a guy who was going to offensive rebound and put back and, catch lobs for the most part. There wasn't many post-up opportunities for Morez and many opportunities to have the offense run through him, which I don't think there should have been this year. But you can understand from a player's perspective, a guy like Morez who probably has dreams of going to the NBA, another year of sharing a front court with Tomislav Ivicic, where he's probably going to be more of a role guy who isn't a huge part of Illinois' offense, is going to play a big role for Illinois, but Tomislav Ivicic is going to be the big man that you run offense through, not Morez. And so maybe there's other schools out there that are like, hey, this guy's got all the talent in the world. We're rebuilding. Maybe we do promise Morez Johnson an opportunity to be a bigger factor offensively than he'd be for Illinois. So I think those are probably the primary reasons that he leaves here, and it definitely hurts. And I think, I want to, in a few minutes here on the pod, kind of go through the potential returners and kind of prioritize who do you want back the most. Morez would have been very highly on that list for everybody, every Illinois fan. So that it definitely is a big loss. And especially when you look, it's hard to ignore. Obviously, there's so much movement now in college basketball that you really can only take it 1 year at a time. But it'd be silly to act like thinking about what Morez Johnson could be as a junior and senior isn't a factor here, because I think he could have been one of the best bigs in the country with some more development, and especially offensively as he continues to grow. Talking about a guy who's just a double-double every night, and a guy that I would have felt really good about building this program around as an upperclassman, and now you don't get that opportunity.
Yeah, we'll have to see where he actually ends up and takes his talents to next year, but I think he has serious All-American potential. I really don't think there's a question about that with the rebounding, first of all, and then, yeah, you unlock some stuff with your offensive game. If you can run a little bit more through him at that different school, so be it. I think he has all the potential in the world. But yeah, it's like, for me, it's hard to really blame anybody. I understand if Morez wants to go somewhere else and find a bigger role and find money on top of that, go for it. Like, everybody's getting paid nowadays. That's what the sport is. That's not what it was really when Morez committed to Illinois. Probably wasn't promised $1 million, $2 million, whatever he's going to get at this new school. So I think that's great for him. It just, yeah, as I said, it sucks as a fan and as a fan of the program as well. But yeah, it's I understand also if there's some hesitancy from his point of view of playing another year with Tommy, because Tommy is so, as a 7'1", 7'2" big man that could potentially shoot 40% from three, gives you maybe 3, 4 assists a game. Next year, like that's a guy that's gonna have the ball in his hands a ton. And with potentially Kylan Boswell coming back, maybe another transfer portal addition that's gonna have the ball in his hands a ton. Wouldn't be that much offense run through Morez Johnson, which I think is fine from Illinois' point of view. But yeah, if you're Morez, you want a little bit more because you understand how talented you are. You understand your potential in terms of NBA and All-American next year, potentially, or junior year, whatever. So yeah, I understand some of that, but it just hurts from Illinois' point of view as a program that recruited a guy for 3+ years, gets him for 1 year, he plays 30 games, starts a handful of games, and really did get some opportunities. Like, he was on the court. I think he only played 17, 18 minutes a game. So that's not crazy high for a guy that was high 4-star, borderline 5-star, even the best player in the state of Illinois coming out of high school. That's not a crazy opportunity, but that's still pretty solid for a freshman that was playing on a really talented team that did end up winning 20+ games, going to the tournament, going to the round of 32 even. Like, he played a lot. Obviously didn't get the ball in his hands offensively on the block or anything a ton. It wasn't really, just didn't have the ball in his hands a ton because in the end, I think he was pretty raw as a freshman. Like, we saw it first couple games of the year, wasn't the best finisher. And then as he transitioned into more of a lob threat, a dunker, a rim runner, as we talked about, yeah, he got a bit more comfortable. But I don't think that's a guy that, as an Illini coach or even a fan, like, you're super comfortable with taking the ball up the court or taking mid-range jump shots or anything like that. So I think Illinois had to work with what they were given this year, and Tom Slavovicic was probably better than advertised coming from Europe. And I don't blame them for running the offense through him. I don't blame them for giving the ball to KJ and Will Riley and Boswell for the vast majority of the year. But yeah, it's just a tough situation overall and really not super fun as a fan.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see where he ends up because I think nearly every program in the country would be interested in having Morez Johnson on their roster. The question is, what role does he want? Does he just want to take the most money possible, or is it a situation based on what some of the rumors have been that he wants a place where he's going to be the no doubt starting big man and he's going to be a big part of the offense. He's going to be allowed to show off maybe a little bit more skill offensively, which I'm not sure he totally has yet, but he absolutely can develop into a really high-level offensive player. He just isn't there yet. And from Illinois' side, like you said, with Tommy an option to return and a pretty likely option, it seems like, it's hard to sit down with Morez and say, yeah, okay, we have Tommy here and you're probably going to be playing a lot of 4 next to Tommy, and even when you are playing the 5, like it's just to promise him or to guarantee him a featured offensive role as a sophomore next season. I don't think that necessarily will work out well for anybody. I think there's a future for Morez that includes being a high-level offensive big. It's just going to take a lot of development. So I wonder where he ultimately ends up and if it is a place that can guarantee him that type of role next year and how that would go. That'll be fascinating to see. But that one stings, there's no question. That's a huge loss for Illinois, probably the biggest portal loss you've had in the portal era. That's the thing with all the roster turnover that Illinois had here recently. Most of them, not all of them, but most of the guys that have transferred have either been guys that you kind of anticipated would transfer because they just, whether they didn't really live up to their potential or they just weren't playing big roles, you kind of realize that they were probably going to move on, go somewhere else. Or it's a guy that, it seemed like maybe Brad Underwood and this coaching staff kind of pushed out or felt like they could upgrade or didn't really want to make a big part of their future. This one is neither of those things. Illinois desperately wanted Morez Johnson, and he probably would have played a huge role on next year's team. So this one hurts more than almost any, if not all, the transfers that have happened since the portal has opened up the way it has for Illinois. But Illinois lost another pretty key rotation piece a day later on Saturday with Trey White entering the transfer portal. And this is an interesting one because, he'll be looking for his 4th school in 4 years. So sometimes these guys just are who they are in terms of moving around, never being satisfied with a place. Can you really be shocked to see a guy who had played at 3 schools in 3 years? I think he'd even played at 3 high schools, hit the portal again. I don't think you should be. At the same time, I think the way Trey White finished the season and his overall body of work this year warranted Illinois wanting him back and him being a key returner to next year's roster. And it felt like, especially, you heard him talk in the locker room to reporters that were in Milwaukee after that Kentucky loss saying, I want to run it back. I'm excited for the guys we have back. Just goes to show you don't trust anything anybody says until they actually talk with their agent and are fielding phone calls from other teams. I just would never take anybody's word as gospel in the portal era. But this is an interesting one because I would have liked to have Trey White back. I thought he could be a pretty key piece to Illinois' roster next year. At the same time, it was an up and down season for him. He was very inconsistent. He played great to end the year, played great for a stretch in early January, fell out of the rotation at a point in early February, which, I am very skeptical that was just, he was sick. I think there were other reasons for that. So maybe something was happening there. And I think in terms of like comparing him to Morez or just as a loss, can you get a guy that can do a lot of what Trey White does? Is he an irreplaceable piece? I don't think so. But definitely a guy that the way he closed the year and just his overall season and just for the point of continuity and trying to keep an older roster and guys together, I think he would have liked to see Trey White come back. So this one definitely isn't nothing. This one definitely impacts Illinois' plans and does hurt a little bit because I think most people would have liked to seen Trey White come back. It just is interesting because of the year he had. So what do you make of this decision?
Certainly interesting. Like you said, you can't trust a word a player says in this era. Can't trust a word a coach says. Can't trust a word an agent says. Everything's fluid. Everything's changing every hour of the day. Like you have no idea what your roster is going to look like 2 days from now. So it's just a wild time to be involved with college basketball. And with Trey White specifically, I think I said last time I was kind of indifferent on him coming back. Like as you said, you saw the positives, some really great games scoring wise, some games where he crashed the glass super hard, and then some games where he was just a non-factor overall. So I think it hurts more knowing that Morez is gone too, and knowing that maybe some other guys are potentially leaving, because I've preached continuity in terms of the roster makeup for next year. I want guys to come back just to build like rebuild a culture and rebuild just continuity. Like you had almost a dozen new guys on this team's roster, and I think that's part of the reason the season didn't work out as most people expected. So yeah, I think if I was told Morez was gone, I probably would have taken Trey White back, even though, as you said, I agree with this. I think he's replaceable. You can find a guy that gets you 10 points, 6 rebounds, and a decent shooter from the mid range and from 3-point range too. But on the other hand, I think Morez Johnson, I saw some people on Twitter saying Morez Johnson is replaceable. Yeah, sure, but as a freshman who was one of the best offensive rebounders in the country, I don't know about all that. I think that's a guy that's pretty unique in the grand scope of college basketball. So obviously I would have loved to have him back. But with Trey White, yeah, you can find a guy that gets you his numbers, but I think he stepped up a little bit as a leader towards the end of the season. That was a big part of Illinois going on a 4-game win streak and really turning the season around a little bit towards the end of the year. So I think having a guy like that come back for year two and being in summer workouts, being with the new inevitably the new guys that transfer in here, and just being around a program for more than 7 months, like that's important. Even if he's been at a couple different schools, 5 schools in 5 years or whatever, you can live with that if it's a guy that can actually be committed to the Illinois program, which for whatever reason, that's probably not the case with Trey White anymore. So um, I think it does hurt as a loss. Obviously, not as much as Morez. You can replace him in the portal, but yeah, just with all the factors of continuity and leadership and a guy that seemed like he really cared about Illinois, actually. And as you said just a couple days ago after the season ended, like he said, I want to run it back. I want to be back with the guys that I played with this year. And now that's not going to happen for a variety of reasons, I'm sure. So yeah, this one definitely hurts too.
Yeah, I definitely would have liked to see him come back just because I would have liked to see 3 of your 5 starters or more than 50% of your starters return, which would have been the case, assuming, and we'll talk about it in a minute, that Kylan and Tommy come back just to get Trey back and a senior, a guy who's played 3 years of high major basketball. Really, he started 3 years of high major basketball. So a really experienced player, a guy that can fit well in a role. He's not a guy that's going to command the ball all the time. Now, maybe that's what he was looking for, and that's why he's leaving. I don't know. But at least in theory, was a guy that just could kind of slot in there. He's not going to be a super high usage guy, but he's going to be a guy that makes an impact, good rebounder. I think they're at least a serviceable defender. I would have liked to see more. That's the one thing that, he left some to be desired this year on the defensive end. I think you would have liked to see him be a little bit better on that end, but he's not a terrible defender. He's a guy that had some really solid defensive games. And I just think he slots in there as a nice little role piece and a guy that can make a pretty big impact. Now, in terms of both how much of your budget do you want to use on a guy like Trey White? I don't know if it's a huge number. And, what do you want to guarantee him? Do you sit down and say, okay, Trey, you are going to start next year and be like our third highest minutes guy behind Kylan and Tommy, no matter what next season? I'd be hesitant to go that far with a player like him just because I do think he's inconsistent and does have some limitations. But certainly would have liked to have him back. You tell me he's a guy that can compete for that starting 3 spot and at the very worst is your 6th man. I sign up for that all day long. So it's definitely a loss that I think does hurt and just continues to turn over the roster. I mean, you lose the opportunity to have some of that continuity by losing a guy like Trey White, who by the end of the season, I think was a guy you wanted to be part of that core for next year's team. So definitely hurts, and really both those guys, I think talk a week ago and you would have expected both those guys to probably return, and they don't. So definitely is not something to be ignored. But let's talk about the guys that can still return for Illinois and what that could look like, because at this point you want to have as much continuity as you can. It's going to be another roster that's pretty new, but it's not, you don't want it to turn into last year. That's for sure. You don't want it to turn into, okay, we're dry. We got nothing. We got to completely rebuild this thing, because that is an endeavor that, as we've seen, is very hard to take on. So I think we would both agree on this. Number one priority, Tomislav Ivicic. Number 1B/2 priority, Kylan Boswell. Get both those guys signed, sealed, delivered back to Champaign. Those two guys are your building blocks as returners. You cannot afford to lose either one of those two guys right now.
Yeah, no question about it. 1A, 1B. I mean, it'll depend on who else Illinois adds and I guess who else returns from the team too. But yeah, those are your top two, no question about it. I think Tommy gives you so much. We saw so much offensively from Tommy. Some games where he's having 5, 6 assists and everything is running through him. He's finding lobs, he's finding open cutters, and then a little low post game. Like I think just with his 7'1", 7'2" size, he can give you a little bit down low compared to some undersized bigs on other teams. And then probably the biggest part, as we saw in March, especially in the tournament, the 3-point shooting, like top of the key, that dude is automatic. And I'm sure his numbers will probably go up next year, assuming he stays, because I think the team as a whole just struggled with 3-point shooting for whatever reason this year. And then Kylan Boswell, 1A, 1B, as I said, I think Kylan Boswell could be your best player next year, even though Tommy is going to have everything run through him, hypothetically. I think he showed you so much in the last month of the year. Like, he had doubters, including myself, of, is this guy going to be reliable for 30, 35 games of the year? Is he going to be reliable from November to March? Not really, but I think the February and March were so good. I'm cool throwing all that out, because he was dominant as a downhill driver. He was blowing by guys. He's out toughing guys, out physicaling guys with that big body. And then the 3-point shooting finally kind of awoke in the final month of the year. He gained some confidence and finally started knocking down those open shots. And then defensively, really 90% of the year, he was your lockdown perimeter defender on a team that didn't have a lot of great defenders. So that was so crucial last year, and that'll be even more crucial next year, I'm sure. So yeah, those guys need to be back, especially with Morez gone. I don't know where I would have put Morez in terms of ranking those three in terms of who's coming back. But yeah, with Morez gone and with Trey White gone too, especially, I think these two just have to be back. Like, no questions asked, pay them whatever they need. Make promises. Like, I'm all for it. There has to be some roster continuity, and I think it has to start with those two guys.
Yeah, those two are going to be the top priorities. Tommy, you said everything. I mean, I think he could be one of the better bigs in the country next year. And even, just if it's not the sheer production, which I do think would take a pretty big leap next year, like you said, I mean, he makes your offense. I mean, he makes you impossible to guard. And especially now, I mean, look, I would have loved to have Tommy and Morez as my starting front court next year. But now that you don't have Morez, you could even go further into completely space the floor, play 5 out, impossible to guard. Tommy at the 5, I think, is a matchup nightmare for most teams when he shoots it the way he did towards the end of the season. His passing ability is outstanding, a guy that can be a secondary playmaker for you, a guy that you can run a ton of action through, a guy that just with another year, a second year playing college basketball, adjusting to the physicality, which I think was the one thing that he struggled with, another offseason of working with Fletch, getting stronger. I think he could take a step forward in terms of his back to the basket game, which I think was a struggle for him, just not really his game this year. It's still not going to be. He's still going to be a perimeter-oriented guy, but I think he could be a little bit better on that front, which could really make him scary because he's good in a lot of other areas, great rebounder, but offensively, he is who you build your offense around, even if he's not the top scorer, which he could be, but even if he's not, I mean, you build your offense around that guy. and you feel fantastic about it because he is just such a problem when he's stretching the floor and passing the way he did towards the end of the season. And I'd also love to see what a year of his could look like when he doesn't have to miss practice for a month and miss time with mono and an ankle injury. I think that could be pretty exciting to have him have a full season with no setbacks, and he handled those phenomenally this year. But yeah, Kylan Boswell, I think from a leadership perspective, I think he's the guy you circle. Senior Boswell, guy who will be in his fourth year playing high major basketball. Yeah, he started his career at Arizona, played 2 years there, but in terms of like a program guy and a guy who is prideful about Illinois, he still is a guy that I think would have that because he's from Champaign. He grew up watching Illinois basketball, grew up 5 minutes from the arena, and as a senior, I think is that emotional, vocal leader that you need on next year's team. He showed that down the stretch of the season. But yeah, his play was spectacular to end the year. And I think he could be an all Big Ten guard next year. He's so strong, so physical. As a driver, he was spectacular to close the season. I think he shot 77% at the rim over his last 12 games of the year after it felt like he couldn't make a layup early in the season. His three-point shot started to come around. I maintain that as a senior next year, I think he shoots it back to what he normally has been. As a high school prospect and his first 2 years at Arizona, he was a very good three-point shooter. For most of this year, he wasn't. I think a lot of that was confidence related because he just was struggling so much. I don't think he had much confidence behind his shots until late in the year when he started to gain it back and you started to see him make some of those. I think he could be back to a 37, 38% three-point shooter next year to pair with his downhill ability, to pair with his elite defensive ability. I think he'd be an all-defense guy in the Big Ten next year. He is the guy that I think would be the face of your team next year, and I think he'd deserve to be. He still needs to get better in some areas. Still would love to see him just be more consistent, not go through lull periods of his season where it feels like he's not fully engaged and isn't a huge part. I don't think he can afford to have that next year with him returning. But I think a senior year, Kylan Boswell, give me all the stock I could have. I think he could be an outstanding guard, leader of your team. The question I'd have with him is, do you trust him to be your primary point guard on next year's team? Throughout his college career so far, he's been more of a shared ball handler with another guard in the backcourt, whether that was Caleb Love at Arizona or Kasparis this year. You did see him handle the ball more than he had down the stretch of the season, especially when Kasparis was struggling. I think he is still effective as a ball screen handler and decision maker. But do you trust him, like in terms of, and we'll talk about what the biggest needs are, would you feel okay adding like a shooting guard next to him that really isn't much of a ball handler and playmaker and saying, okay, Kylan is going to be the guy with the ball in his hands, bringing the ball up the floor, initiating offense for us? I'd question that a little bit. I'd like to maybe have a nice complement, a guy who can share ball handling duties alongside him. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was just going to. I think you bring back Boswell and Tommy, and that sets up one of the best duos in the Big Ten, as returners at least. You got TKR and Braden Smith. That's one of the best duos in the country coming back most likely next year in the Big Ten. But I was going to say, I think Tommy benefited from KJ so much this year in terms of pick and roll and just having a guy that you lean on and have that connection with. And I think Boswell did too. He had some good moments as a primary ball handler, but even like with Will Riley and KJ just having the ball in their hands so much, I think Boswell benefited from that in terms of having a little less pressure on him and just not that much added stress in terms of bringing the ball up, initiating the offense, and just, playing your role, getting your shots when you need to, driving when you need to, and just being a consistent guy more often. So I don't think you need a full-on Kasparis Yakuchonis-like player or addition in the portal. I think that's a bit excessive because I do think Boswell and Tommy could take leaps individually next year. So yeah, you don't need a 15, 6, and 5 guy again. But I think you do need a guy that's comfortable with the ball in his hands like KJ. Maybe not as much of a scorer, but like I don't think you need a true point guard or anything, but I think you need a guy that's comfortable with the ball in his hands, preferably a little bigger because he's physical, he's tough, but he is only 6'1", 6'2". So I think you need a bigger guard, maybe a bigger wing even, that is comfortable with the ball in his hands, gives you something defensively too, gives you a little bit of rebounding with his size, and just can initiate the offense a little bit to take that pressure off Tommy and Boswell when when things get tough and shots aren't falling or whatever, turnovers or you're playing a physical defense, stuff like that. So I think you find a guy like that, and I think if that guy is one of your better players, I think that's a beautiful big three of Tommy, Boswell, and that mystery transfer addition. So that's kind of what I'm looking for in the portal.
Yeah, I want to expand on what those needs are here in a minute when we talk about the portal. I just want to finish off some of the potential returners here. Ty Rodgers is an interesting one. This is one I want to talk about real quick because he's the guy that's kind of just sat back in the shadows, and it feels like the assumption has been since he made that redshirt decision that he probably was going to move on. Still think that very well could happen, but losing Morez, losing Trey White, I wonder if Ty Rodgers becomes a big priority now to try and get back. You talk about a guy who could be a experienced leader for you and a guy that actually has been in your program since high school. He'd be probably the only guy on your roster that could say that next year. If you would have asked me a week ago, how much do you want Ty Rodgers back or how much do you want to prioritize Ty Rodgers? I probably would have said, I don't know, probably not a ton. And the reason for that is because I'd love to have Ty on my team. I would have questioned what his role would look like because I think the fit with him and Morez would have been pretty clunky. I think that hampers your offense too much to where I don't think you could have really played those guys together a whole lot. And then if you were going to get Trey White back, I just think Trey White can do a little bit more than Ty from an offensive perspective. And, I think a big reason that Ty redshirted this past year is because Trey was ahead of him in the pecking order. I wouldn't have expected that to change a year later with both guys getting a year older. So I just would have told you a week ago, I don't know. I would like to have Ty back. If you could tell me he could be a bench piece and come in and give you energy, give you rebounding, physicality, veteran presence off your bench, absolutely. I'd take him back. But would he want that? I would say I'd be surprised, given the fact that a big reason he redshirted this year was because that was probably going to be his role on last year's team. Now you lose Morez, you lose Trey. You wonder what that role could look like for Ty. I think it could be pretty big. Could he even start at the 4 next to Tomislav Ivičić? I don't think that would be out of the question. I think he would give you, while he's not 6'9", he's not a big, he's not a guy who you really necessarily want to play at the 5, he can give you a lot of what you're losing with Morez Johnson from a physicality standpoint, from a rebounding standpoint, from a motor effort standpoint. I think he would be a guy that would soften the blow of losing Morez if you were to get him back just based on the things that he brings. Now, he would still probably not be able to play a 30-minute role just because I think he does limit your offense, and I think he takes away some of Tommy's effectiveness. So I don't know if I would fully be bought in on okay, Ty Rodgers starting 4 next year next to Tommy, because I do think now that you've lost Morez, you're minimizing some of Tommy's impact if you do play a guy like Ty next to him. But I do think Ty's role could be pretty big on next year's team. I wonder. I still would probably expect him to leave just because that's been the expectation. But you wonder if Illinois really makes him a huge priority now to say, okay, we need some continuity desperately. We need a guy like Ty just to be a program carryover, a guy who will be in his 4th year in the program. And now that you don't have Morez and Trey, I think the fit makes a little bit more sense. So where do you stand on that?
I would have 100% taken back, but I think we're coming back to the same issues we saw last offseason. I think, yeah, you love the rebounding, you love the physicality, the toughness, and the fact that he's been in your program for 4 years. But obviously, we don't fully know the reason for him redshirting. It could be Tim Anderson, could be the role, but I think most of it comes down to the role, And I think even with Trey White gone, even with a non-shooter and Morez gone, I think Illinois is still going to add transfers in the wing category. Still going to have some returners, maybe Jake Davis, maybe Ben Hummerkaus in that group. But I just don't see a role for a huge role for Ty Rodgers. I mean, I think it comes back to that question or the thing you said about Trey White a couple minutes ago in terms of, are you going to commit to Trey White being your 3rd highest minutes guy on the team? Probably not. Are you going to commit to Ty Rodgers starting or playing more than, I'd say, even 15 minutes a game for next year's team? maybe 20 minutes. Like, probably not. And I think Ty Rodgers is probably going to see that. As much as I love him and would want him back, I don't think he comes back just because the role. And yeah, I just don't think you can commit to a guy with what Illinois has done with our offense in terms of spacing the floor and everybody shooting threes and taking threes. Um, I just don't really see a fit for Ty Rodgers, and I don't see why he would want to come back and subject himself to the same stuff he went through last offseason and really falling down the pecking order, as you said, after being a starter on a Elite Eight team the year prior.
Yeah, I think he checks a lot of boxes that you do want in terms of, yeah, replacing some of the intangible stuff that you're losing with Morez, rebounding, which I think has taken a huge hit now with the losses of Morez and Trey, and athleticism. Just a guy that's athletic and can be a impact defensive player. I think you need all those things on next year's team. So I would like to have Ty on it. Like you said, I don't really want to commit to some huge featured role for him because I just think he's too limited offensively for that, and he still doesn't really fit how Illinois wants to play offensively ultimately. So I do wonder if Illinois could even really promise him a starting role on next year's team. I'd be surprised if they were willing to do that, just because I do think that, his shooting limitations does minimize some of the vision that you want with a guy like Tomislav Ivic in there. But at the same time, you need to fill a roster, and Ty Rodgers is a guy that you'd love to have as a part of it. I just think there are some limitations there. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm with you. My expectation would still be he enters the portal, but we'll see if losing Morez and Trey changes that. If he does come back, I'd be really happy about it. If he decides to come back, I think he's a guy that would provide a ton of value for next year's team, and you never know how much improvement a guy like him could make. He's been in the gym just working to get developed for a year and in practice, being like the top scout team guy. So you never know what that could look like. You still get potentially 2 more years out of him. If you told me he could, post something on Twitter today that says I'm running it back, I'd be thrilled about it. But we'll see how that goes from Illinois' side of things. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, my full expectation is he transfers. I just think it's one of those situations. While I think, again, he would have a role on next year's team, don't think it'd be a starting role. I think it'd be the same role that he had on this year's team. From his perspective, would be shocked if he wanted to sign up for that. I think it's one of those mutual transfers that would make a lot of sense. Dre, go look for a bigger role somewhere else. And for Illinois, I don't think you want to commit a huge part of your budget or any role guarantees to Dre, just because I think he's been inconsistent. He hasn't fully broken out and proven himself to be a guy that you can count on as a big piece on next year's team. My expectation is that he will leave. Benham Rickhouse does have another year of eligibility left. I think we probably disagree on this one based on how we've discussed it privately before. I would take Ben back if he wants to come back. Now, the caveats being, don't want to allocate a huge part of the budget to Benham Rickhouse, and he will not start next year. So if you could tell me that Benham Rickhouse comes back as a backup front court option, a guy off the bench for next year's team that is going to be a true role piece, maybe your 8th man in the rotation, a guy that can come in and he can make your offensive lineup dangerous playing at the 4 next to Tommy. And, and I do think truly that a second year, we see all the time guys that just are more comfortable in their second year, especially the guys that transfer up from a lower level. And you got to keep in mind, this was a guy 2 years ago that was playing NAIA basketball. I think a second year in the Big Ten, he can shoot it better next year. He's a better shooter than 34%. Is it a guarantee he shoots it better? No. I would, if I had to make a bet that he shoots it either 34% again or 38% next year or higher, I'd probably take the latter. I just think you could see a jump there. He's still going to be limited defensively, still not going to give you a whole lot else, but you telling me that you could get a 23-year-old, 50-year senior, 60-year senior that can space the floor 6'9", can make for an interesting match in certain lineups with Tommy in the front court and give you some minutes off the bench as a shooter, I would take him back. I think you disagree with that, and that's fine. I'll let you go on that.
Yeah, it really does go against a lot of what I've said in terms of bringing guys back, especially old guys, because Ben Hummerkaus is that. He could be the second year in the program as a 23, 24-year-old, whatever he is. but I just don't see it, man. Like I do agree that his shooting numbers would probably go up with maybe less opportunities, but just the shots maybe fall next year in a better offense hypothetically. But my official Ben Hummerhouse take is I think Jake Davis does the same exact stuff, and I think Jake Davis could be better. I think even though he's younger, I think this is one of the times where I think being younger would actually help. Like I want Jake Davis because probably probably costs you less NIL money, could spend more time in the program developing because he'll go into his third year next year, whereas Ben Hummerhouse would be out of eligibility. And then I think they're both just snipers. Like that's all they do. And I think Jake Davis, he's a bit smaller, he's a bit skinnier maybe, but Ben Hummerhouse offers you virtually zero post defense. He offers you nothing offensively besides 3-point shooting. And as he was only 34% last year, which was Jake Davis's shooting percentage as well. So I think if both those guys come back, I think you're wasting two roster spots on what should just be one roster spot, a deadly 3-point shooter. Even though you're prioritizing 3-point shooting, that's how your offense runs. But I just don't see it. I don't think he gives you much. Like I don't know him personally, but I don't think he gives you much as a leader in the locker room. That wasn't really the vibe I got from him this year. I'm not sure Jake Davis does either, but I don't know. I think you just probably take one of them, and I would lean Jake Davis personally.
Yeah, Jake Davis was the last one I was going to get to. I'd wonder about that. I don't think Illinois will have much money for him, or much more guarantee of a role more than what he had this past year as kind of just a spot minutes guy. I'd love to have Jake back because I think just having a guy that is okay in a smaller role, but a guy that can provide some value, you put him on the floor, you feel like you're not, he's not killing you out there at the very least, and maybe he's really helping you. He had some games where he had some great minutes, made some shots. I would definitely want Jake Davis back if he's okay playing a similar role. But yeah, we'll see on Ben Hummerhouse. He's got another year. I would take him back as a backup front court option. I think he actually was serviceable on the defensive end towards the end of the season when he came off the bench. Now, is he going to get exploited one-on-one? For sure, but I think as a help defender, as a guy who used his size better than he did early in the year, I think he took some strides there late in the year. I think he'd be a decent bench piece on next year's team with the opportunity to really become a high-level shooter like Illinois thought he was going to be. But I think your opinion's a valid one, too, because there's no question he was a disappointment this past year. And if you're getting this year's version of Ben next year, I think you just say, we could probably do better in the portal. So it's definitely a risk, at least in some capacity, depending on how much budget he's taking up. But if you tell me he's okay signing up to be a 15-minute-a-game bench guy, I'll take him. Absolutely. That's kind of where I stand on it. But let's talk about the transfer portal. Illinois has not landed anybody in the portal yet. There's been some interest in plenty of guys, but there's going to be quite a few needs here in the portal. And Brad Underwood is no stranger to going and getting big portal classes. You're going to need one for this year's roster. And there's some needs here for Illinois. So I kind of want to go through and just kind of, bounce back and forth, just kind of openly what some of the top needs are in the portal. I think for me, the number one need in the portal that I want to see Illinois land is an individual scorer. And what I mean by that is a guy that can really just off the dribble can go get you a bucket individually. And does he have to be the leading scorer on next year's team? No, maybe he could be. I do think Tommy or Kylan could be that for Illinois. But the one thing I don't necessarily think Tommy and Kylan are like guys, well, definitely not Tommy, but even Kylan, for as good as I think he could be offensively, I don't see him as a guy that's like, okay, 15 seconds left. We need a guy to go individually create a shot for himself. That's just not really Kylan's game. He can get downhill, and he can drive it well and get to the free throw line, but off the dribble shooting, that's not Kylan's game. I think you need a guy who can make some shots off the dribble for you, who can just individually create shots for themselves. Now, could that guy also be a secondary ball handler, a guy you can play in ball screens, a guy that can be a decision maker for you? I think that's ideal to pair alongside Kylan Boswell, but I think the number one need for me in the portal is a guy that you feel comfortable can go create offense for themselves, can be a legit shot maker for you, both from three and from, the mid-range, getting to the basket. Just shot creation, I think, is the number one option for me. One guy that Illinois is very hard trying to get was just on a visit to Champaign this weekend. Iowa transfer Josh Dix. I think he'd fit that mold in terms of a shot maker, an individual shot creator, but also a guy that can be a secondary ball handler and can definitely make decisions and play in some ball screens, but really can just be a highly efficient scoring option for Illinois. So we'll see if that happens. Kansas is very much an option there too, so that'll be a battle. That'll be an uphill climb for Illinois to win, but that type of guy, I think, is a huge need for Illinois.
Yeah, I think sign me up for Josh Dix. I know he's very highly sought after with Kansas and some other schools offering a lot of money, but sign me up for that. That's a guy. That's like one of the few Iowa players over the last couple of years. I'd say with like the Murray brothers that I respect his game. I like what he does a lot. He's a guy that kind of just quietly goes out there and gets you buckets from a variety of spots on the court. So I think, yeah, adding him would be massive. Yeah, I like your take. I think kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of a guy that can run the offense a little bit. Yeah, find his offense personally too. I think if you think back to 2 off seasons ago, or was it, I don't know, 2 or 3 off seasons ago, Illinois was going after Ray J. Dennis for a couple weeks, couple months maybe.
The infamous Ray J. Dennis recruitment, that one was a nightmare.
If you could find a guy like that, maybe not, doesn't have to be as talented, but Ray J. Dennis was almost KJ like in terms of he had his own offense, but he could also run. He went to Baylor. He ran their offense pretty nicely that year he was there. If you could find a guy like that maybe from a mid-major school or from a lower high major school, a guy that wants to transfer up and play in the Big Ten, sign me up for something like that. I think that would be tough to pair a guy like that with Josh Dix and with Kylan Boswell. Maybe you have to choose one or the other. But yeah, there's just so many guys in the portal that guys are still going to be entering for the next couple weeks. There's just so much that's left to be seen in terms of who's going to be in the portal and who Illinois can actually go after. So that's one of my top needs. I'd say my second need, I really think because I want Ben Hummerkaus gone, no offense to him, I think you need some front court depth. I think you need rebounding and preferably some post defense added in there. So you can kind of combine that into one and just say a backup center, maybe a starting power forward. That I don't think they have to be a knockdown shooter or anything like Illinois tried to go after in Hummerkaus, but Illinois hasn't really had doesn't have to be a lockdown post defender, but like a physical big man that can hold the zone in the paint defensively to pair along with Tommy, because they had that in Morez last year. Dane Danger was a big body for a couple of years at Illinois, but he wasn't like a great post defender or anything. Decent rebounder. Morez was a good rebounder, but I think you need to find a guy that you can pair with Tommy that can, lock down and take care of other teams' opposing bigs, because Tommy's probably still not going to be that next year, even though he could get stronger, he could develop his defensive game, but I think he's here for his offensive attributes.
Yeah, totally agree. My second need would have been a front court complement to Tommy that provides some physicality and athleticism, because those are, I think, the two things that Tommy lacks, and that is exactly what you're losing with Morez Johnson. Now, it's way easier said than done to find a guy like that because, like I said, big men are going for big dollars, and it's just hard to win some of those battles, especially for guys that are athletic and can provide some rim protection and post defense, like you said. But I think that's a big need for Illinois. You need to complement Tommy with another big who can make up for a few of the deficiencies that Tommy is going to have. And I think you need more athleticism in your front court, especially if you do get Ben Hummerkaus back, plus maybe Jason Jaxtis steps into at least some type of role. Like, you're missing an athletic front court option, a guy who can maybe be switchable, or at least just a guy who can be more of a rim protector and a little bit more versatile defensively. I think there's been so many complaints about Illinois' ball screen defense and the fact that they're playing this deep drop. You don't really have much of an option with Tommy. You did have more options when you had Morez, and that was something that I was going to be looking for next year. Could you mix up defensive coverages with Morez, take advantage of his mobility, his athleticism? Now you don't have him anymore. Can you get a big that you can still maybe do some different things with defensively from an athletic standpoint? I would love to see that happen. Again, it's probably a guy that would have to be comfortable coming off the bench or really complimenting Tommy well. So again, it's hard to get some of those guys, at least a guy that you know is a proven player, because it's going to be a tougher sell for Illinois. But yeah, I think, you need front court depth, but I do think it needs to be a guy that complements Tommy well and gives you a little bit more athleticism, physicality than Tommy provides for you. So I don't know. There hasn't really been any targets. I mean, again, Morez Johnson, as we record this, entered the portal 2 days ago. He was a big part of Illinois' plan. So in terms of where Illinois has turned in the front court, I don't really know. We'll see. I'm sure they'll be active in the front court market. Or having Orlando Antigua to go after front court guys, huge asset. I feel great about that. I mean, Orlando Antigua recruiting front court pieces. The last one he brought you was Tommy. So we'll see where that goes. But I feel good about having Orlando as a guy that can go maybe try to track one of those guys down. I think in terms of third need, you need wing help now. I think Dame Sarr is a guy that Illinois has been in on. He's an international prospect from Italy, playing for FC Barcelona, played with Kasparis last year on the national team, and is a guy that Illinois has recruited for a long time. Now, he has played outstanding basketball here recently, and it sounds like he's drawn some more interest, so we'll see if Illinois can still get that one done. I think that'd be a huge add to next year's team, because he's a guy that, while he's young, he is filled with talent. He's long. He's got a ton of defensive upside. He's a playmaking wing, a guy that can pass, a guy that can do some things with the ball in his hands. His shot's been inconsistent, but he can definitely shoot it, at least to some capacity, and has shot it great here recently. And I mean, he started for FC Barcelona's A team here recently and has averaged double-figure scoring. Kasparis couldn't even play on that team. He was a guy who barely cracked that rotation when he played on the B team a lot. And when he was playing with the main FC Barcelona team, Kasparis barely even played. Dame Sarr starting for them here recently. So that's a guy that I think Illinois wants from the wing perspective. But in terms of the portal, I think he'd like shooting. I think you always want shooting. Price Sanford from Iowa is a guy that Illinois is getting on a visit here this weekend. Elite shooter, definitely has some deficiencies in other areas. I don't think would be a guy you want to start, but bench wing to provide some shooting and spacing, and a guy that is still only a sophomore, maybe can develop into a Peyton Sanford light. Who knows? I think that'd definitely be a guy that would be impactful, but we'll see where that goes with him. I don't know if I want 2 Iowa players next year's team. I'd settle for the one in Josh Dix. I don't know if I need multiple Iowa guys from a defensive perspective. But shooting, I think, is always a need. But just you need a guy on the wing who can make an impact in some area, whether that's defensively, whether that's as a floor spacer shooter with some size. Losing Trey White now and potentially losing Ty Rodgers, although Ty Rodgers could fit some of those things. You need a guy on the wing who can play in that lineup. Maybe it is a starting caliber wing to pair with Kylan and Tommy, and maybe another guard that you're adding. That's obviously a big hole now on Illinois' roster.
Yeah, I probably should have added this with my last take about the front court and getting some depth there. I think rebounding is you don't have to go and find the best rebounder in the portal or anything, but I think rebounding is one of those things in college basketball, at least, like, you kind of take it for granted. Like, when you're an elite rebounding team, you kind of just live with it. You just assume you're going to get these offensive rebounds back. You assume you're going to get more 3-point looks based off of that. And I think when you don't have rebounding, it's very visible. And, I think having really good rebounding covers up some holes in other areas in terms of, maybe we gave up a pretty terrible shot defensively, but we have a bunch of really physical wings and big men that can secure that rebound. Maybe we take a terrible shot offensively, but we could still crash the boards with 4 guys and grab a rebound and get a better look. So I think Illinois has found some really good rebounders in past years and just has been a really good rebounding program recently. And I would like that to continue, because I think it's just really fun as a fan too. And it makes your team a whole lot better and covers up things, as I just said. So yeah, I think rebounding it has to be somewhere in there. Just find bigger, longer wings and longer front court pieces. But yeah, I think shooting's a huge thing too. That kind of goes hand in hand with that, based on what Illinois did this past year in terms of really just chucking up threes, crashing the boards with 4 guys, getting the rebound and shooting another 3. And, they still won 22 games, made the round of 32, had a decently successful season. I'm not saying you have to fully replicate that next year, but, something close is probably what they're going after. So I think you got to find some shooting. You do have a couple freshman guards that are just not talked about by Illinois fans at all, and Brandon Lee and Keaton Wagler. So I wouldn't expect them to play a whole lot next year, but those are also some guard pieces, some guard depth pieces in the backcourt that you can be excited about. But yeah, I think you really do have to fill out this roster because as we just talked about with the continuity, you assume Boswell's back, you assume Tommy's back, and then maybe one of the two of Hummerkaus and Jake Davis. DGL's probably gone. Maybe you get Ty Rogers back, but that's really three or four guys tops coming back from this year, plus Jason Jaxtis, who didn't play at all. So yeah, you just got to find depth overall and find guys to fill out the roster. Obviously, get some scorers in there, but yeah, I think the focus has to be finding a good piece that can complement Tommy, as we talked about, and find a guy because they really just ran into this issue with Morez of finding or having a guy that probably didn't want to complement Tommy in terms of his role offensively and not presumably not having the ball a ton. So find a guy that can fit that mold and pair with Tommy pretty nicely in the front court there. And then yeah, just find depth and shooting across the board. And I think Illinois will have a pretty successful season next year too.
Yeah, the one other need I was going to throw in there was guard depth, assuming that you were going to lose Dre Gibbs Lawhorn. And yeah, you brought up the two freshmen. I'm curious to see how much those guys will factor in next year. I think both will have a chance to, but I wouldn't count on either one being a big part of the rotation as freshmen. Keaton Wagler is a high-level shooter, really, really good shooter, and a guy that can do some things from a playmaking perspective as well, and has some defensive upside to him for sure. Just needs to get stronger. I don't know if he's going to be physically ready to play high major basketball next year at a high level. And then Brandon Lee, who is definitely more physically ready, at I think 6'3", 6'4", microwave scorer, guy who could do a little bit more from a shot creation perspective off the dribble than Wagner, but very inefficient in AAU and in high school. So probably a guy that needs just a little bit more refining before he's ready to come in. Maybe a guy that is similar to what Dre Gibbs Lawhorn did as a freshman in terms of there's going to be a few games where he comes in and he shows some flashes offensively. Maybe comes in and scores 8 points, but I think it'll probably be an up and down role for him. So I think guard depth in the portal is going to be important, but probably a guy who is comfortable coming off the bench and playing a role. Maybe kind of like a Justin Harmon type from last year's Elite Eight team. I know Jalen Sellers, the transfer from UCF, is a guy that has Illinois in his top four. I think that'd fit the mold. He's an athletic guard who has some real defensive upside, who I think could come off the bench and, if Kylan's off the floor or just, give you some things that you maybe don't have. He's not necessarily a super high level shooter, very efficient scorer, but a guy who can make shots and is just athletic and a guy who can maybe play a role as a guard. So we'll see maybe if Illinois could reel him in. I don't know how serious that is, but I know Illinois is one of his top options. But somebody like that as guard depth, but not a guy that's necessarily going to be featured or even a starter. I think you'd like to shoot higher than a guy like him as your backcourt starting complement. I think Dix would fit that mold in terms of a starter and a true scorer in your starting lineup, but also depth behind him, maybe a guy that also could play a little bit of point guard as well, a backup point guard type, if that other guard addition is maybe more of a scorer and not much of a ball handler. So there's still so much to play out here. And last thing, just to hit on for 1 minute, coaching staff. I wonder if Illinois will hire a new assistant coach. Quay Jones, after Tim Anderson stepped away from the program, but really in all reality, he left the program last offseason. Quay Jones was elevated as kind of an interim assistant for this year. We'll see if Illinois brings in a new assistant coach. I think that's a real possibility. I know, there's been a lot of talk about like Tyler Underwood rumors and everything like that, and just people that we've talked about it even before that aren't fans of having him on the staff. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's ran the number 2 and number 14 offenses in the country the last 2 years. I know there's rumors are floating around in terms of the Morez situation about him. I don't know about any of that stuff, but I think Tyler Underwood and Zach Hamer will be back next year. Orlando Antigua, Jeff Alexander will be back next year. If Illinois is going to hire a new assistant, it'll be for that Quay Jones spot. I think that's possible, but that's the one other thing that could happen this offseason.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I've been a pretty vocal Tyler Underwood defender. Not sure about all the rumors that are floating around Illini Twitter and all that stuff, but I think the results have spoken for themselves. Besides, I know the poor 3-point shooting was an issue this year, but still 22 in season. Last year, legitimately one of the most efficient offenses in college basketball history. I think you live with what he gives you. Yeah, I'm totally fine with Quay Jones being replaced. He seemed like a good guy, but probably not ready for the full-on assistant role, assistant coach role at a huge program like Illinois. So that'll be interesting to monitor as well. It's just kind of weird that we haven't seen a whole lot of like targets pop up in the portal yet. I know Illinois is still trying to figure out who's back on their actual roster right now, and the season is still going on. But I feel like at this point in past years, like Illinois has had 10 guys that are on big boards, and everybody's monitoring it and tracking for 24 hours a day. But we haven't really seen that a whole lot this year, so that'll as always be very interesting to keep an eye on.
Yep, and there's still, I believe, 16 days left of the portal open, and so we'll see, teams that just wrapped up the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 might have guys enter. There's always guys that enter late. There's always guys that, like, the last 2-3 days of the portal, the portal dries up. Teams are like, oh, shoot, we have needs on our roster, and then, all the, if you want to call it tampering, even though it happens everywhere, whatever the case may be, guys are like, oh, well, let's see. We're going to throw huge money around at this guy. Oh, wait, now this guy's going to enter the portal because he heard that maybe you shouldn't stay because he can get an astronomical amount of money that he's probably not worth because teams are desperate with 2 days left of the portal window. So there's still going to be so many moving pieces. The only 2 visits that Illinois has had confirmed so far, Josh Dix and Peyton Sanford, the 2 Iowa transfers, but I'm sure that they've been working on plenty of other guys as well. And, I think front court guys are ones that they'll probably be working on. Other guards, I guess Sellers is another guy that they've been linked to. I don't know if he visited or not, but Illinois in the top 4 for him. So a couple other, mid-major guards that I think have popped up on the radar, but there's going to be plenty more. There's going to be plenty more guys that enter the portal, and there's going to be a ton of movement here this offseason for Illinois. So we'll kind of play it by ear here on the pod. If there's any big news, big commitments, we'll maybe jump on, try to record, but it's kind of going to be fluid. I don't know when our next episode will be. It'll depend on when there's enough to talk about Illinois roster-wise, but make sure you follow along with us to find out at Champagne on Ice on X. Subscribe to the Field of 68 Podcast Network YouTube channel. Find us wherever else you get your podcasts, and happy off-season to all who celebrate. So far, it's been a sad off-season for Illinois, but hopefully it gets happier with some better news on the horizon for the Illini. So we will talk to you next time right here on the Champagne